Somewhere along the way, you picked up the idea that there was something a little wrong with you. Nobody handed it to you in plain words. It arrived in smaller ways. The pause after you said the thing you were actually thinking, the slightly puzzled look. The way other people seemed to relax into conversations and situations that left you feeling like you were performing a role you'd never rehearsed. And you drew the only conclusion a person can draw when they feel permanently half a step out of rhythm with everyone around them. You decided the problem was you. You decided you were weird. Here's what Carl Jung would have told you, and he would have said it without a trace of flattery, because flattery wasn't his style. What you've spent your life calling weirdness is far more likely to be rarity. And those two words describe the exact same set of traits seen through two completely different instruments. Think of it this way. A radio tuned to one station hears every other frequency as static, as interference, as noise, as something to be adjusted away. It isn't that the other signals are broken. It's that the receiver was only ever built to catch one band. For most of your life, you've been standing in rooms full of receivers tuned to a frequency you simply don't broadcast on. And when they couldn't pick you up cleanly, they didn't conclude that their range was narrow. They concluded that you were noise. Over time, you started to believe them. Jung spent his life studying the people the world couldn't quite tune into. His consulting room filled up, decade after decade, with individuals who arrived convinced they were defective, too sensitive, too intense, too withdrawn, too questioning, too much and somehow not enough at the same time. And what he found, again and again, was that a certain kind of person gets systematically misread by the culture around them. Not because they're malfunctioning, but because they're carrying traits the collective doesn't know how to measure. The instruments most people use to judge normal simply aren't calibrated to detect what these individuals actually are. He had a name for what these people were moving toward, often without realizing it. He called it individuation, the slow process of becoming who you actually are instead of who you were trained to be. And he noticed that the people furthest along that path almost always looked from the outside like they were doing something wrong. They pulled away when others leaned in. They went quiet when others performed. They questioned what everyone else accepted. And the world, unable to read them, reached for the nearest available word. Weird. Difficult. Too much. A little off. Today I'm going to walk you through 10 of these traits. 10 things that get you labeled as strange, as antisocial, as intense, as hard to be around. And I'm going to show you what Jung understood about each one, why it happens in the psyche, why the people who have it feel so alone, and why every single one of these supposed flaws is actually a marker of something the world produces very rarely and needs far more than it admits. Because by the time we're done, I don't think you'll want the word normal back. I think you'll finally understand what you've been carrying this whole time. The first thing is this. You disappear into solitude, and everyone around you treats it like a symptom. There's a particular kind of tiredness that only certain people know. It doesn't come from work or lack of sleep. It comes from being around people, even people you love, for slightly too long. And when it hits, you don't want a distraction or a pep talk or company to take your mind off it. You want a closed door. You want silence. You want to be somewhere no one needs anything from you, where you can finally hear yourself think again. To the people around you, this looks like a problem. They worry. They ask if you're depressed, if something happened, if you're mad at them. They take your need to withdraw personally, as though your solitude were a verdict on their company. And because you've heard this reaction so many times, you've probably started apologizing for a basic feature of how you're built. You've learned to sneak your solitude, to schedule it around other people's feelings, to treat your own need for space as something faintly shameful. Jung, who coined the very terms introvert and extrovert, understood this at a level most people never reach. He saw that some people are oriented outward. Their energy flows toward the world, toward other people, toward activity, and they recharge in the middle of all of it. And some people are oriented inward. Their energy flows toward the inner world, toward reflection, toward the vast interior landscape that most people barely visit. For that second kind of person, The outer world isn't where life happens. It's where life gets spent. Solitude is where it gets made. What Jung understood is that this inward orientation isn't avoidance. The person who craves solitude usually isn't running away from people. They're running towards something, a relationship with their own depths that can only happen in silence. When you close that door and feel the relief flood in, you're not shutting life out. You're finally letting the deeper part of yourself back in, the part that gets drowned out by constant noise and constant demand. And here's the piece the world never grasps. The people who can tolerate real solitude, who don't need to fill every quiet moment with a screen or a voice or a task, are the people who eventually develop something almost no one has: an inner center, a place to stand that doesn't depend on the crowd's approval. Jung believed that a person who never learns to be alone never really becomes an individual, because they never get far enough from the collective voice to hear their own. The whole culture stays inside their head, telling them what to want and who to be. So when you disappear into your solitude and someone treats it like a malfunction, understand what's actually happening. They're measuring you with an instrument built for extroverts, and it's reading your recharge as a breakdown. But you're not withdrawing from life. You're doing the one thing that lets you come back to it as yourself. The frequency you go silent to hear is one most people have never even tried to tune into. That doesn't make your silence empty. It makes it rare. The second thing is that you feel the emotional temperature of a room the moment you walk into it. You've done it 1,000 times. You step through a doorway and something lands on you before a single word is spoken. You know instantly that two people in the corner were arguing before you arrived. You feel the false brightness in someone's smile. You pick up the tension underneath a perfectly polite conversation. It's not that you're guessing. It's that the information arrives in your body. A tightening, a heaviness, a sudden urge to leave, long before anyone confirms it out loud. And when you name it, people look at you strangely. You say, "Is everything okay between them?" And they say, "What are you talking about? Everything's fine." And later it turns out you were right. You knew something you had no logical way of knowing. Over the years, this has probably made you doubt yourself more than trust yourself, because you can't prove any of it. And the people around you would rather call you paranoid than admit you're perceiving something they can't. Jung took this kind of perception seriously in a way that his more rigid colleagues found almost embarrassing. He recognized that a great deal of communication between human beings happens beneath the surface, in a channel that has nothing to do with words. He understood that some people are extraordinarily porous to the unconscious material of others, that they pick up the emotions a person is hiding, sometimes even from themselves. What you're reading isn't the room's surface. You're reading what everyone in it is trying not to show. The reason this feels like a curse as often as a gift is that you can't turn it off, and you can't verify it fast enough to defend it. You absorb the anxiety of a stranger on a train. You come home from a gathering carrying moods that weren't yours to begin with, and you can't figure out why you feel so heavy when nothing bad happened to you. Nothing bad happened to you. It happened around you, and you took it in through a channel you never learned how to close. Jung would have told you that this porousness has to be managed, not ashamed of. He knew that a person this open to others has to learn where they end and where other people begin, or they'll spend their whole life flooded, mistaking everyone else's weather for their own. That skill takes years to build, but the underlying sensitivity, the raw ability to feel what's actually going on beneath the performance, is not something you developed by choice, and it's not something most people could develop at all. This is a receiver picking up a frequency the rest of the room can't hear. When you walk in and feel the truth underneath the pleasantries, you're not being oversensitive. You're being accurate about a layer of reality most people have gone numb to. The world has trained itself to take the surface at face value, to believe the smile and ignore the tightness behind it. You never got that training, or it never took. And that leaves you exposed, yes. But it also makes you one of the few people in any room who actually knows what's happening in it. The third thing is that small talk drains you, and depth is the only thing that makes you feel alive. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes over you at parties, at networking events, in the break room, anywhere the conversation stays on the surface. Someone asks how you are, and you feel the fatigue arrive before you even answer, because you already know the whole exchange is a script, and both of you are just reading your lines. The weather, the weekend, the traffic. You can do it. You've learned to do it, but it costs you something, and it gives you nothing back. And then, occasionally, something breaks through. Someone says a real thing. A stranger admits they're struggling, or asks a question that actually matters, or drops the performance for half a second, and suddenly you come alive. You lean in. The tiredness vanishes. You could talk to that person for 6 hours about death, or meaning, or the thing they're most afraid of, and you'd walk away feeling more rested than when you started. The thing that everyone else finds heavy is the thing that feeds you. This has made you feel broken more times than you can count, because the world runs on small talk. It's the connective tissue of ordinary social life, and your inability to enjoy it, or even to tolerate much of it, gets read as coldness, as arrogance, as being difficult. People think you're judging them when really you're just starving at a table full of food you can't eat. Jung understood that some people simply cannot live comfortably behind the persona, the social mask that lets everyone perform the agreed-upon version of themselves. The persona is necessary. It's what allows a society to function without everyone's raw inner life spilling out at the grocery store. But some people find the mask almost physically painful to wear. They can put it on, but they can never forget it's there, and every hour spent behind it feels like an hour spent away from something real. What drains you about small talk isn't the smallness of the topic, it's the distance it enforces. Small talk exists precisely to keep two personas safely apart, to make sure nobody actually touches anybody. And you were built for contact. You want to reach the person underneath the mask, and you can feel, every second, when a conversation is designed to prevent exactly that. So of course it exhausts you. You're expending energy to maintain a barrier your whole nature is trying to dissolve. Jung believed that the capacity for genuine depth, the hunger to get past the surface and meet another person where they actually live, was one of the marks of a psyche that had refused to fall completely asleep. Most people make an unspoken peace with the surface. They live their entire lives in the shallow end because it's safe and it's easy, and no one ever asks them to explain themselves. You never made that peace. Something in you keeps insisting there's more and refuses to pretend there isn't. That refusal is why you feel so out of place in casual company, and it's also exactly why the people who do go deep with you never forget you. You offer something almost nobody offers: the willingness to actually be there, past the script, in the real conversation. The world calls that intensity, like it's a flaw. What it really is presence. And presence is one of the rarest things a human being can give. The fourth thing is that you can tell when someone is lying to themselves, not just when they're lying to you. Most people can spot an obvious lie. You can spot something much stranger and much lonelier. You can see the gap between who a person believes they are and who they actually are. You watch someone insist they're fine while every part of them screams the opposite. You listen to someone describe their motives and you can feel, underneath the words, the real motive they can't admit even to themselves. You see the mask, and you see the face beneath it, and you see that the person wearing it has forgotten it's a mask at all. This is a deeply isolating ability, because you can almost never say what you see. If you tell someone they don't actually want the thing they claim to want, or that they're angrier than they're letting on, or that the story they're telling about their life is a defense against a truth they can't face, they don't thank you. They get defensive, they pull away. You end up looking like the difficult one, the one who can't just let people be, when all you did was accurately perceive something they've built their whole identity around not seeing. Jung's work centered on exactly this territory: the shadow, the part of a person that gets pushed out of the conscious self because it's too threatening, too shameful, too inconvenient to acknowledge. Everyone has a shadow. Most people spend enormous energy keeping it out of view, from others and especially from themselves. And Jung understood that certain individuals have a kind of X-ray perception for other people's shadow material. They see the disowned anger, the buried grief, the hunger the person is pretending not to have. They read the parts of others that those others have exiled. The reason this feels like a burden is that seeing someone's shadow doesn't give you any power to help them with it. You can't hand a person their own unconscious. Jung was very clear that people only integrate their shadow when they're ready, in their own time, through their own suffering, never because someone else pointed it out. So you're left in an agonizing position. You can see the wall someone keeps walking into, over and over, and you're not allowed to name the wall, because naming it only makes them defend it harder. But understand what this perception actually indicates about you. To see through other people's self-deception at that depth, you have to be at least somewhat acquainted with the mechanism of self-deception itself. You have to have looked at your own shadow enough to recognize the shape of it in others. Most people can't see this in anyone because they've never turned that gaze on themselves. They're too busy maintaining their own illusions to detect anyone else's. Your ability to read the gap between mask and face means you've spent time in the uncomfortable place most people flee. That's why the world experiences you as unsettling sometimes. People sense that you see more of them than they've agreed to show. It makes them uneasy, and occasionally it makes them resent you because you're a mirror they didn't ask to stand in front of. But the same perception that unnerves the unconscious is a gift to anyone who actually wants to grow. The rare few who are ready to face themselves will find in you something they can find almost nowhere else. Someone who already sees them clearly and doesn't flinch. Jung would have said you carry the eyes of a psyche that stopped lying to itself first and paid the price to do it. The fifth thing is that your inner world is so vivid it sometimes feels more real than the world outside. There's an entire life happening inside you that no one else has ever visited. Rich, detailed, populated. You replay conversations and imagine new ones. You build entire scenarios, feel the emotions of things that never happened. Your dreams are cinematic, sometimes disturbing, sometimes so beautiful you wake up grieving that you have to leave them. When you're walking down the street, half of you is out there in the world and the other half is somewhere far more interesting, and you've spent your whole life quietly commuting between the two. You probably learned early not to talk about this too much. You mentioned an imaginary something as a child and got looked at oddly. You tried, as an adult, to describe the intensity of your inner life and watched someone's eyes glaze over. So you kept it private, this whole second existence, and you started to wonder if it meant something was wrong with you. If normal people really do just walk through the day thinking about lunch and errands, uncluttered by the vast interior theater that never turns off for you. Jung would have been fascinated by you, not worried about you. His entire psychology was built on the discovery that the inner world is real, that the unconscious is not a garbage bin of repressed junk, as some of his contemporaries believed, but a living, generative source of images, meaning, and wisdom. He developed a practice he called active imagination, in which a person deliberately engages with the figures and images that rise up from within, treating them not as nonsense, but as messages from a deeper intelligence. To Jung, a vivid inner life wasn't a distraction from reality. It was a direct line to the most important part of it. What most people don't understand is that this inner richness is where nearly all human creativity comes from. Every story, every invention, every piece of music, every genuinely new idea. It all originates in someone's interior, in that space where images and feelings combine into something that didn't exist before. The people who live intensely in their inner worlds are the people who bring things back from it. The ones who walk through life on the surface, uncluttered and efficient, rarely create anything because there's nowhere in them for something new to form. Jung believed the relationship between a person and their own unconscious was one of the most important relationships they would ever have. Most people never develop it at all. They treat the inner world as noise to be silenced, dreams as random static, imagination as childish, and in doing so, they cut themselves off from the deepest source of guidance and creativity they possess. You never made that cut. Your inner world stayed alive, insistent, loud, and while that's made you feel like a stranger in a world obsessed with the external, it's also kept you connected to something most people lost long ago. So when the world outside feels thin and the world inside feels vivid, don't take it as a sign you're detached or unwell. Take it as a sign that the channel is open, that you have access to a frequency of experience most people have deliberately tuned out of. The trick, and Jung would insist on this, is to build a bridge between the two worlds, rather than choosing one and abandoning the other. But the fact that you have a rich inner world to build a bridge from isn't a problem. It's the raw material of every meaningful thing you'll ever make. If any of this is starting to land, if you're recognizing yourself in these traits and feeling that particular relief of being seen, there's something I want to point you toward before we go further. We put together a guide called True Self-Discovery, 24 reflection exercises drawn directly from Jung's approach to the inner life. It's built for exactly the kind of person we've been describing, the one with the vivid interior world, the one who spent years being told they're too much and half believing it. Not to fix anything, because nothing here needs fixing, but to help you finally turn toward what you've been carrying instead of apologizing for it. You'll find the link just below. Now let's keep going, because the next traits cut even closer. The sixth thing is that you question the rules and traditions everyone else follows without thinking. There's a moment you've lived through countless times. Everyone around you is doing something a certain way, following a custom, obeying an unspoken rule, accepting a belief, and you find yourself unable to just go along with it. Not because you want to be difficult, but because a question has risen up in you that you can't suppress. Why do we actually do this? Where did this come from? Does anyone here even believe it? Or are we all just performing it because we're afraid of what happens if we stop? You've learned that asking these questions out loud makes people uncomfortable, sometimes angry. They experience your questioning as an attack on things they've never examined and don't want to. You get called a contrarian, a troublemaker, someone who can't just let things be. And there's a private cost too, because questioning everything is exhausting and lonely. It would be so much easier to simply accept the script the way everyone else seems to. But you can't. Something in you refuses to run on borrowed conclusions. Jung had a deep and specific concern about what he called mass psychology, the tendency of human beings to surrender their individual judgment to the collective. He watched, in his own lifetime, entire nations fall into a kind of trance, adopting beliefs and behaviors that no individual member would have chosen alone, simply because the group was moving that way. He understood that the pull of the collective is enormous, almost gravitational, and that most people never resist it because they never even notice it's there. The group's values feel like their own values. The group's fears feel like their own fears. The person who questions is the person in whom that gravitational pull has, for whatever reason, failed to fully take hold. Jung would have said this is both dangerous and precious. Dangerous because it puts you at odds with the tribe, and the tribe has always punished those who won't fall in line. Precious because the collective, left unquestioned, is capable of monstrous things, and every correction in human history came from individuals who refused to accept what everyone around them accepted without thinking. What looks like your inability to conform is really an inability to outsource your conscience. Most people let the group decide what's right and wrong for them. It's efficient, it's safe, and it means never having to carry the weight of your own moral judgment. You carry that weight whether you want to or not. You can't hand it off. And so, you end up examining things other people gave up examining long ago, testing them against something inside yourself that won't accept an answer just because a crowd is nodding along. Jung believed that individuation, becoming a genuine individual, required precisely this capacity to differentiate yourself from the collective psyche. As long as you simply absorb the group's assumptions, you're not really a person yet. You're a fragment of the crowd wearing a name. The questioning that makes you so inconvenient to be around is the exact process by which a self gets formed, one refused assumption at a time. It isolates you, yes. It always has, for everyone who's ever done it. But it's also the only path to actually owning your own mind. The world calls you difficult. Jung would have called you awake in a room full of sleepers. The seventh thing is that you've never fully belonged to any group, and at some point you stopped trying. You've watched other people slide effortlessly into belonging. They find their crowd, their team, their tribe, and they fit like a key in a lock. You've tried to do the same more times than you'd like to admit. You've joined things, adopted the language, worn the uniform, laughed at the jokes. And every single time past a certain point, you felt the same quiet ache, the sense that you were still somehow on the outside of the thing you were technically inside of, close but never merged, present but never fully absorbed. For a long time you probably thought this was a defect in you. Everyone else can belong, so why can't you? You watched people find their people and felt a loneliness so specific it almost had a taste. The loneliness of being surrounded and still unclaimed. And eventually, maybe recently, maybe years ago, something in you stopped fighting it. You stopped trying so hard to fit. You made a kind of peace with standing slightly apart, even though the peace has an edge of sorrow to it. Jung would have recognized this immediately, because he understood that the price of individuation is exactly this kind of belonging. The more a person becomes genuinely themselves, the more they differentiate from the collective, develop their own values, refuse the ready-made identities on offer, the less they fit into any group defined by shared conformity. Groups cohere around sameness. They require their members to shave off the parts that don't match, and the person who is committed, consciously or not, to becoming whole simply can't perform that shaving anymore. Too much of them would have to be cut away. This is one of the loneliest truths in all of Jung's work, and he didn't pretend otherwise. The individuating person walks a path that, by its nature, can't be walked in a crowd. You can have companions on it, deep ones, but you can't dissolve into a group and keep individuating at the same time. At some point, the two goals become incompatible, and the psyche that's oriented toward wholeness will choose wholeness over belonging every time, even when the conscious mind is aching for the crowd. But here's what Jung understood that changes the whole picture. The not belonging you've experienced isn't exile. It's the natural condition of a person who has outgrown the kind of belonging that requires them to disappear. The groups you couldn't fully join were groups that would have cost you yourself. Your inability to merge with them wasn't a failure of connection. It was your deeper self refusing a bad trade. And Jung believed that the individuated person eventually finds a different kind of connection, rare but real. Not the belonging of the crowd, where you're accepted because you're the same, but the belonging of genuine relationship, where you're seen because you're distinct. Two people who have both become themselves can meet in a way that two members of a crowd never can. It takes longer to find, and there's less of it in the world, but it's the only kind that doesn't require you to vanish. You didn't fail at belonging. You were being saved, the long and lonely way, for the only kind of belonging worth having. The eighth thing is that you feel beauty, music, and meaning with an intensity that sometimes embarrasses you. A piece of music comes on and something cracks open in your chest. You're standing in front of a painting, or under a certain quality of evening light, or reading a single sentence that lands exactly right, and tears come to your eyes for reasons you can't fully explain. A moment of beauty hits you like a physical event, and you've learned to hide this, to blink it back, to keep your face neutral, because you've seen that the people around you don't feel it the way you do, and to show them how much you feel would be to reveal something almost indecent. You've probably wondered more than once whether you're too emotional, too fragile, whether other people have some protective layer you're missing. They can hear the same song and just tap their foot. They can walk past the sunset, and you're standing there undone by it, wondering why a thing so ordinary to everyone else has reached into you and rearranged something. It can feel like a form of weakness, this susceptibility to beauty, in a world that prizes being unbothered and cool. Jung had a word for the quality of experience you're describing. He called it the numinous, the sense of being touched by something vast, something sacred, something larger than the ordinary self. He considered contact with the numinous to be one of the most important experiences a human being could have, and he observed that it comes most often through exactly the channels you're so susceptible to: music, beauty, art, the natural world. Moments where the veil between the ordinary and the profound goes suddenly thin, and something pours through. Most people, Jung noticed, have largely lost access to this. The modern world trained them out of it, taught them to be ironic, detached, to treat awe as embarrassing and reverence as naive. They can go years without a single experience that stops them in their tracks. And Jung believed this loss was catastrophic, that a person cut off from the numinous is cut off from the very thing that makes life feel meaningful rather than merely functional. The people who can still be moved to tears by beauty are the people who never got fully sealed off from the sacred. What you're feeling when a piece of music undoes you isn't fragility. It's an open channel to a dimension of experience most people have paved over. The intensity you're embarrassed by is the psyche responding, fully and honestly, to contact with something that genuinely matters. You're not overreacting. Everyone else is underreacting, having numbed themselves to the same signal you're picking up at full strength. Jung would have told you to protect this capacity fiercely, because it's the source of the deepest kind of meaning available to a human being. The person who can be moved is the person who can be reached by beauty, by truth, by love, by the things that make a life feel like it was worth having. Your susceptibility to the numinous means you're still capable of being genuinely alive in a way that a great deal of the world has traded away for the safety of not feeling too much. Hide it if you need to, but never mistake it for weakness. It's evidence that something in you never went numb. The ninth thing is that you need your life to mean something, or you can't function at all. Other people seem able to do things simply because they're supposed to. They take the job because it pays, follow the path because it's the path, fill the days with activity and don't seem to require any of it to add up to something larger. And you've tried to be like that. You've tried to just do the thing and collect the reward and be satisfied. But it never works for you. When your life loses its sense of meaning, you don't just feel a little flat, you come apart. You can't get out of bed. The whole machinery grinds to a halt because some part of you flatly refuses to run on a life that doesn't matter. This has caused you real trouble. You've walked away from things that looked good on paper because they felt hollow. You've struggled to sustain effort toward goals that everyone told you to want, but that meant nothing to you. And you've watched people with far less angst climb steadily up ladders you couldn't even make yourself step onto. And you've wondered what's wrong with you that you can't just be normally, quietly motivated by the ordinary rewards that seem to be enough for everyone else. Jung understood this at the core of his psychology. He believed that the deepest human need, deeper than comfort, deeper than success, deeper even than happiness, was the need for meaning. He watched countless people arrive in his consulting room who had everything the world said should satisfy them, and who were nonetheless collapsing inwardly, because their lives had no meaning they could feel. He came to believe that a great deal of what looked like illness in modern people was actually this, a psyche in revolt against a meaningless existence, refusing to keep functioning inside a life that felt empty. What you experience as a weakness, your inability to run on empty, to keep going without a sense of purpose, is actually the psyche's refusal to betray itself. Some people have successfully muffled that voice. They've made peace with a life that doesn't add up, and they keep the machinery running on habit and distraction. You never manage to muffle it. It stays loud. It shuts you down when you drift too far from something real, and it won't let you back up until you found your way toward meaning again. Jung would have said this makes you difficult to sedate and impossible to fully domesticate, and that both of those things are marks of a psyche that's still fundamentally healthy. The person who can go through the motions of an empty life without any protest has, in a sense, made a deeper compromise than you ever could. You can't help but keep asking what it's all for. And that question, however much it's cost you, is the question that keeps a life from becoming a slow sleepwalk toward the end. So the next time your whole system shuts down in the face of a meaningless task or a hollow goal, try to hear it correctly. It's not that you're lazy or broken or lacking in discipline. It's that you're built to require the one thing most people have learned to live without. The meaning you keep insisting on isn't a luxury or a neurosis. It's the fuel your particular kind of psyche actually runs on, and no substitute has ever worked. That demand is inconvenient in a world organized around empty motion. It's also the thing that will keep your life from ever becoming one. The 10th thing is that you're strangely calm in a real crisis and restless in ordinary comfort. Here's something you've probably noticed about yourself that seems almost backwards. When everything falls apart, a genuine emergency, a disaster, the kind of situation that sends most people into panic, you go quiet and clear. You know what to do. You feel almost more yourself in the crisis than you do in ordinary life. And then, when things settle down, when life becomes stable and comfortable and safe, you get restless, uneasy. You start to feel a low-grade dread in the middle of exactly the peace that everyone else seems to be chasing. This has confused you and the people who love you. They want you to relax into the good times, and you can't quite do it. You reach a plateau of comfort, and instead of relief, you feel a strange itch, a sense that something's missing, a pull toward the edge of things. Sometimes you've even sabotaged your own stability or gone looking for difficulty, and you've wondered whether there's something self-destructive in you, some inability to just let things be good. Jung would have seen this differently and more generously than you probably see it yourself. He understood that some psyches are oriented not toward stability, but toward transformation. Their center of gravity isn't safety, it's growth, change, the ongoing process of becoming. For a psyche like that, comfort isn't a reward, it's a kind of stagnation, and the restlessness you feel in the middle of the good times is that psyche registering that no growth is happening, that you've stopped moving, that you're safe and going nowhere. The calm in crisis makes sense through the same lens. A real crisis is a moment of transformation, of everything being reshuffled, of the old order breaking down so a new one can form. And your psyche, which is built for exactly that kind of movement, meets the crisis as its natural element. While everyone else panics because their orientation towards stability has just been shattered, you settle, because something in you has been waiting for the shape of things to become fluid again. You're not calm because you don't care. You're calm because, on some level, this is the territory you were made for. Jung believed that the whole arc of an individuated life was a series of these transformations, that the psyche is supposed to keep dying and being reborn over and over, shedding old identities and forming new ones, right up until the end. Most people fight this with everything they have. They want to reach a stable identity and then stop, freeze it in place, defend it forever. And the restlessness you feel in comfort is your psyche refusing to freeze. It won't let you stop becoming. It keeps pushing you toward the next edge, the next dissolution, the next reformation, because that movement is what it's for. This is probably the trait that's cost you the most peace, because it means you can never fully settle into the ease that other people seem to enjoy. But understand what it indicates. You're carrying a psyche that's still alive to its own development, that hasn't made the deal most people make. The deal where you trade all future growth for permanent safety. You keep choosing the edge, you keep moving. And while that makes ordinary comfort feel like a slow suffocation, it also means you'll go on becoming, right through the parts of life where most people quietly stopped. So, look at what we've actually laid out here. You retreat into solitude, and it turns out you're feeding the inner center most people never build. You read the emotional truth of a room, and it turns out you're tuned to a frequency the world went deaf to. You can't survive on small talk because you were built for contact. You see through people's illusions because you faced your own. Your inner world stays vivid, your questions stay alive. You never fully belonged. You feel beauty too intensely. You need meaning to function, and you can't settle into comfort because you're still becoming. Every one of those traits got you called weird, and every one of them is a marker of a psyche that refused to go to sleep. Jung spent his life insisting on a distinction the world constantly gets wrong. There's a difference between being sick and being different, and the culture almost always mistakes the second for the first. It looks at the person who won't conform, who feels too much, who withdraws, who questions, who can't be satisfied by ordinary rewards, and it reaches for the language of malfunction. But what Jung saw, over and over, was that these were often the healthiest people in the room, the ones who hadn't traded away their depth, their perception, their conscience, their capacity for meaning, in exchange for the comfort of fitting in. They paid for that health with a certain loneliness, but they kept something most people surrendered long ago. They kept themselves. The instruments the world used to measure you were never built to detect what you are. That's the whole misunderstanding, right there. You were handed a verdict: weird, too much, difficult, off, by receivers that could only pick up one narrow band, and you spent years believing the verdict because you didn't know the instrument was the limited thing. It isn't you that's noise, it's that most of the room was only ever tuned to static and called everything beyond it interference. None of this means the loneliness isn't real, and Jung would never have insulted you by pretending it away. Being rare costs something. It means fewer people who truly understand you, more time on the outside, a life that doesn't come with the easy belonging that others take for granted. But there's a difference between the loneliness of being broken and the loneliness of being early, of carrying something the world around you hasn't caught up to yet. You've been living the second one and calling it the first. And the moment you stop doing that, everything about your life starts to read differently. Because the people the world can't tune into are the people it eventually cannot do without. The ones who feel the truth beneath the surface, who refuse the crowd's easy answers, who need their lives to mean something, who can still be moved to tears by beauty. Those are the people who end up seeing what everyone else missed, saying what everyone else was afraid to say, making what didn't exist before. Not despite the traits that made them strange, through them. The very things you were taught to hide are the things the world has always secretly depended on the rare few to keep alive. So you can go on wishing you were normal, if you want. You can keep trying to file yourself down to a shape that fits the receivers around you. Plenty of rare people spend their whole lives doing exactly that, and they die with the signal never once transmitted, having convinced themselves to the end that they were simply broken versions of everyone else. Or you can do the harder, better thing. You can accept the instrument was wrong. You can stop translating yourself into static for the comfort of people who were never going to hear you anyway. And you can finally start living at the frequency you were actually built to broadcast on. You're not weird. You never were. You're one of the rare ones, and the world has always needed you far more than it ever let you believe. If something in this stirred you, if you've spent this whole time feeling the quiet shock of being named after years of being misread, that's the exact place to begin. Our guide, True Self-Discovery, is 24 reflection exercises built on Jung's work, made for the person who's ready to stop apologizing for their own frequency and start understanding it. It won't make you normal, and it isn't trying to. It's there to help you turn toward the rare thing you've been carrying and finally learn how to live from it instead of hiding it. The link is waiting for you just below.